Welcome back to the Laura Coates Show. Here's your host, Laura Coates.
Well, welcome back to the Laura Coates Show right here on SiriusXM POTUS. We'll give you the daily poll question coming up in a few moments for the Michael Smerconish program at the top of 9. We've got a full day of programming for all of you today. Today will also be a big day when we're expecting to hear President Biden unveil an immigration order limiting asylum seekers. We will get more information as we have it, but apparently the executive order uses an authority known as 212F, a regulation used under the Trump administration and widely denounced at the time by Democrats. What we know so far is that it would effectively shut down the U.S.-Mexico border to asylum seekers crossing illegally when a daily threshold of crossings is exceeded, which is likely to get fierce pushback from progressives and immigration advocates as well. Apparently, it's been in the works for many months. It would severely restrict migrants who are seeking asylum at the U.S. southern border if they cross the border unlawfully. Once the threshold reached 2,500, meaning given the measures that we are seeing today, could almost take effect immediately. Unaccompanied minors would be an exemption to this, and it would allow authorities to turn away migrants while in effect either to Mexico or their origin country. As you know, the U.S. previously worked with Mexico when a COVID-19 era border restriction known as Title 42 also resulted in certain migrants being returned to Mexico. Many are asking and hoping the president will explain why now at this juncture and why not in the past earlier in his administration, even in spite of legislative efforts by the likes of Senator Lankford and others to spearhead this issue. Well, joining us now is Congressman Byron Donald, a Republican out of Florida's 19th Congressional District. He's on the Committee on Oversight and Accountability and also the Financial Services Committee, to name a few. He joins us now. Congressman, welcome back and good morning. How are you?
Doing good. How are you doing? Good to be back.
I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. Let's begin where I was just talking about this immigration executive order. You and I have talked in the past about the concerns for and about the border. It remains a very important issue to voters, frankly, across the political spectrum. What do you make of the decision of the Biden administration to announce the executive order now?
Oh, I think it's highly political. They're only doing this because Joe Biden's poll numbers have been disastrous when it comes to the southern border. People, no matter what party they are, do not like what's happening. The voices of America has been very loud about them wanting to have the border secured. But we're 5 months away from a presidential election. And so, now he's going to run around the country saying that he fixed the problem. Well, the problem is he made the problem. Like, the border was secured when he took office. He unsecured the border because it was basically Trump's border protection protocols. And he said, oh, no, we can't do that. That's inhumane. And what he created was a humanitarian and a political disaster. So now he's trying to come out and fix it. And even based upon your description of what he's going to do, that's a half measure anyway. What the administration has really done the last 2 years is not asylum applications, it's catch and release. So there has to be something in that order would turn off catch and release. I mean, I anticipate, they'll be tough on the border for 4 months because of the election. And then if Joe Biden gets another 4 years, they're going to basically turn this order off. They're going to get rid of the order and go back to the way things have been under his presidency. So it's a half measure, purely political, just for the election, not serious in any way because he doesn't want to secure the border. He's being forced to because now he has to go before the voters.
Well, certainly the decision does show that politics of immigration have shifted sharply to the right over the course of his presidency, and there's been growing support, even among Democrats, for border measures that Democrats once announced and Trump had championed. This, though, would be the most, at least for Biden or any other modern Democrat, it would be the most restrictive border policy instituted. But to the point that you're making about, I'm summarizing as too little, too late in many respects, does it address the issue even in a incremental way? Would you support, if this were to return to the legislative side of this, a measure like this?
No, because I think it has to be far more robust. I mean, first of all, take a step back. I want to do everything we can to slow the flow down. Mm-hmm. But even this proposal doesn't do that. What it really allows for, and like the proof is always in the pudding with these types of things, what it allows for is that they're going to still allow, 1 million entrants per year on 1.2, 1.5. Joe Biden's already allowed an upwards of 10 million people, if not more, into the country through catch and release, through asylum, through all these different programs, which has overrun our cities. So it's not just about slowing it down now. You already have, your house is already flooded. Now going to fix your pipes is not your issue. You got to get the water out. So is he going to start deporting people? That would be a serious proposal. I don't think he's going to do that. And so that's where the country is. You're going to have to deport a lot of people. They got to go back to their home country. You got to actually clean up your legal process so that if you wanted to have more immigration into the United States, then we have a legal process that can support that. Right now, we do not. And then you go from there. And so I think that's really where things lie. I mean, in terms of what happened in the Senate, there's a reason why the Senate bill could never get out of the Senate, because it was a terrible bill. Even the sponsor of the bill, Mr. Langford, didn't vote for it the other week when Chuck Schumer put it up.
That was an interesting moment when people were wondering and scratching their heads a little bit about why that would be the case. Of course, as you recall at the time, many believed that the former president had put his thumb on the scale because the issue of the border, this was political cynics thought this, and people who believed that and were supporters of Trump, that believed that the reason that he would put the thumb on the scale is because immigration is a winning issue for Republicans, and he had no incentive to solve the problem. Now, I know you disagree with that thought process and how it's done, but taking a step back, Congressman, this is one of the frustrations for many in the electorate. You know, obviously, everything you can't always get the whole loaf of bread. But could you be satisfied with a slice? When it comes to the border in particular, why should the voters look at issues like this and say, no, I've got to have everything or nothing at all?
Well, two things. I think it's important to be clear. I know everybody has their belief on what happened to the Senate bill, but I spoke with Speaker Johnson when the Senate bill was starting to be leaked. I was in a room with him and several other members. When the leaks first started coming out about what was in the Senate bill, the 5,000 people per day before the emergency measures get put in place, we said no. Nobody had talked to President Trump yet. It was like a week later when President Trump weighed in on it. So I think it's important for people to understand the Senate bill was never going to get a vote in the House. That is not because of President Trump. That's because it was a terrible bill. And so we understood that. And I know I know that politics wants to play it and say it was Donald Trump, but that's simply not true. That's not what happened. Now, so on a broader level about what a compromise looks like for the American people. Up here in Washington, if you put out some compromised piece of legislation that doesn't actually fix the core issues, then what you get is the typical political fan dance where politicians will say, oh, we fixed the problem. This is a step in the right direction. People take a breath and say, man, they actually did something. And then 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, you realize nothing was fixed. And that actually frustrates the American people. It doesn't help them feel that their government is actually advocating for them. So that's why, you have members like myself who who are not interested in half measures or not interested in a slice. They're interested in actually getting most of the problems solved. And so you have to, unfortunately, say no to slice deals or bad deals or half-measure deals because you understand if you say yes to a deal like that, thinking you can come back later and do more, the reality is you're not going to be able to come back later and do more because when it comes to the border, the Democrats are going to say, we did that 3 years ago. We're not doing anything else, and your problems continue to persist.
Well, certainly this is what the electorate is seeing, and hearing your explanation of it certainly explains a great deal about what is happening behind the scenes and the why, because voters do look at it and say, well, hold on, weren't we just here and why wasn't it done the first time? And yet, when you're hungry, sometimes you just want a slice. Let me ask you, though, about what's happening with the verdict of the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. The sentencing will take place July 11th, days before the Republican convention. He is the nominee. He's all but had the confettis fall on his shoulders. A huge fundraising haul was taken in over the month of May, not the least of which came after the verdict. And yet there's a lot of concern and tension about people like Senate candidate Larry Hogan, the former governor of Maryland, who tweeted out prior to the verdict to accept the results of the verdict and has been hammered, not the least of which by the RNC co-chair Lara Trump. What do you make of the fallout with respect to this tension between accepting the process and a jury verdict and the claims that this has totally been weaponized in favor of Biden?
First of all, I think what's happened has just really been disastrous for the country on so many levels. I mean, you have a judge in New York and a prosecutor in New York who's created a constitutional crisis for the country. And that's really where we are. This is a constitutional crisis. Number two, I think for people who will say, but the jury has spoken, what I would recommend that those people with that opinion do is honestly put aside Donald Trump for a moment and actually look at the case itself and look at the process, look at the case, look at the procedures that Judge Marchand allowed. If you look at it through those veins, through that vein, removing Donald Trump, you will clearly see that this was a runaway freight train of a prosecution. There is no underlying crime. You can make the argument, and I make that argument, that Donald Trump's constitutional rights were violated. And that's not indicative of Donald Trump. That's indicative of any person, any American. So when you have a situation where essentially the judge and the prosecutor are on the same side of the deal, how can you then say, oh, but the jury spoke, so everything is okay? You cannot do that. That does not work. And so I think that that's where a bunch of the frustration stems from. Number two, you're talking about a payment of what, $130,000 back in 2017.
I don't want to cut you off, but we are really limited in time, so I want to make sure you have a chance to conclude your point, Congressman, without me cutting you off, because the timing of our show, I'm so sorry about that. But your last point quickly? Thank you.
Last point is, you're talking about $130,000 payment in 2017, and that now constitutes jail time in the state of New York. That's just absurd, especially considering so many other offenses that are at a minimum probation, or Alvin Bragg doesn't even bring charges in the first place, or Alvin Bragg's history is limiting charges from felonies to misdemeanors.
Congressman Byron Donalds, thank you for joining and going with me on our limited time. Always great to hear your perspective. Thank you so much. Here comes Michael Smerconish.